Okay, I think it is actually on YouTube now. Um, okay, so in principle, we should be live at the moment. Um, trying to get my trying to get into my account on my tablet so that I can do the whole chat thing. Um, looks like it might be device dependent though. Account, turn on incognito. Said the video was private. Okay, well, um, let me see what I got going on YouTube at this moment. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, I'm not quite sure. I've just plenty of technical difficulties, but we are going to go ahead and get started because at the very least, I know my cameras are working and I know that I have everything I need to do this. So, um, let's see. Let's do this. Let's start with it. And just so you guys know, as much as obviously there needs to be a little bit of prep for something like this. We're not necessarily going to do a whole lot of there's not going to be a whole lot of preparation because obviously I still want the father to do his thing and we can rock and roll. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Let's go to um Romans chapter 12 and let's go to verse 2. It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Okay. So let's see. Let's start with let's go to Young's literal here. It's going to be our best Greek to English translation. And be not conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. For you're proving what is the will of God, the good and acceptable and perfect. Okay. So a lot of you may have heard this verse, and a lot of you may have felt like you knew what it was talking about. You knew and understood that it was, you know, it was a thing where you were no longer part of the world because you were a Christian, you had gotten saved, and now you were, you know, um, you weren't allowed to curse anymore. You weren't allowed to make a comment about a woman who was jogging, etc. Right? I mean, that's the principle. Is time to be good. But how many of you in that process found yourselves very unfortunately not able to do it? How many of you, when you got saved, secretly were still angry, still lustful, still all of those things? How many of you were that way and you were basically like you were basically frustrated with your relationship with God? I mean, like when you first get saved, it's that new thing, it's that intensity, it's that belief, oh my gosh, I'm going to heaven. everything's okay now. And then you get through that honeymoon period, and there's this moment when you're disillusioned, when you're like, this isn't all it was cracked up to be. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't my function, right? I am still a mess. Well, it is.
No sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to assume that that was when I muted everybody, and I accidentally muted my computer as well. So I'm not quite sure how far I got to go back. So we're going to go back all the way to this. So in Romans 12, chapter 12, verse 2, it says, and be not conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. For you're proving what is the will of God, the good and acceptable and the perfect. Okay. So I'm going to start with the principle of when we first become Christians, there is a moment in time where we have this intense excitement, zeal, and motivation to be different. Okay. And the tendency is that everybody is telling everybody else that they're different now because they're a Christian. And it's interesting because in that process, one of the things that we are experiencing in that whole thing is the idea of what we've been told. We're told we're different, right? Okay. But how many of you had that moment after the honeymoon period where there was a disillusionment? And at that time, basically what happened is there was a moment of like, must not be a Christian because I'm not changing. And you know what's interesting is it's kind of a social mores kind of thing where it's like in its short version, basically what we're looking at is this idea that, you know, when you're a Christian, you're not supposed to curse anymore. You know, you try to do these things different, right? You don't lust, you don't covet, right? All those things. But the truth is secretly and privately, you're failing. And that's starting to play a role in your life in such a way that it is removing the joy, removing the motivation of being a Christian. Oftentimes people just flat out fall away. Well, if you ask determinists, they say that we are predetermined to be a certain way and act a certain way and think a certain way, and that results in us doing things a certain way. And that's all part of this big old plan. Okay. Determinists say, oh, well, some people fall on the word of God, right? Which they say the word of God is this 600 years past Christ compendium of scripture, right? That's supposedly the established word of God. Now, you know that I have in times past challenged that, but I want to move more in the direction of saying that you're not alone. You're not alone in this at all. People are disillusioned as Christians because they're being told one thing, but are actually experiencing another. So I want to explain to you what's actually going on. The reason why you're disillusioned, the reason why you're questioning your salvation, questioning your relationship with God, etc., etc. The goal behind this series is to open your eyes to the truth about all this. So if you were to just hear these next few words, you could sign off YouTube right now, not listen anymore, and go about your daily life and already have an understanding of everything that I'm about to teach you. And that simply is, you are right now your wounds, your limiting beliefs, and your entitlements, and you struggle because you lack imagination. Now, I know that this stuff sounds a little bit off the wall when I first present it, because obviously, number one, that's offensive, right? To say, you look, you're the problem. You're the reason why you feel disillusioned. You're the reason why you wonder whether you have a relationship with God or not. But how many of you who are watching right now actually have what they think are mental illnesses, personality disorders? They have issues. They go to counseling. How many of you right now question your relationship with God, question your relationship with your family, question your relationship with yourself, and are disillusioned with mainstream Christianity, but also with the Bible and with everything else? Because why? Because what you're told is not what you're experiencing. I'm going to tell you something, and this is going to be uncomfortable for you fundamentalist Christians. It's simply this: your experiences override that compendium of words they call the Bible. Your experiences override other people's spiritual revelation. Your experiences override other people's words from God. And your experiences just so happen to override the expectations of a Sunday morning pew sitter who wants to tell you why your life is screwed up, or who wants to judge you for being screwed up. It's not okay. Now, I want to make some points, and I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm just going to state them. We might put them on the board later. Notice that I am in a sitting position for this one, so I'll have to walk over to the board, and that's because number one, I want this to be a discussion, and I was really hoping to have the YouTube chat up in front of me while I'm doing that. I'm gonna have to figure out how to get that pulled up on my tablet so that I can chat while people are, I can watch the chat in questions. If there's anybody on YouTube and they just happen to know the stuff that I'm talking about, you can speak in the live chat and discuss things. I really want to get to where we're all on YouTube for this. And so we're just all chatting with each other and I'll be the only one speaking. Okay. So a few reasons why I want to address this. The reason why I wanted to do a Renewing Your Mind series. Number one, I could counsel each one of you individually and teach you these things, but I want to teach you these things globally. And one of the reasons I do is because one of the things that's lacking in the church today is unity. And I think unity is more than just agreeing upon doctrine. In fact, I think agreeing upon doctrine can technically turn into a bunch of yes men and power players on a board of church directors, and that's it. So let me explain to you why you are suffering from this disillusionment. And let me explain to you what needs to change. You are suffering from disillusionment because you entered into Christianity. You entered into a relationship with Christ with an expectation. And that expectation is that there was going to be an instantaneous change. But one of the things you need to realize is that Christ, as a human being presenting himself to the disciples, was not immediately trusted. Miracles were impressive, but you do not see Peter be functional until after Christ's resurrection. He's a very dysfunctional human being, isn't he? But here's the deal. You were told, oh, you're going to heaven. Oh, you're changed. Oh, this, oh, that, right? I'm sure there's a presentation of original sin in the very fabric of your salvation. In other words, you were told that you were totally depraved or that you were born in sin. Okay? And there's plenty of scriptures to back it up, right? But now, here is something that's important, and I'm gonna basically kind of I'm gonna do it this way. You have, as a result of your wounds and limiting beliefs that have somewhere where they came from, and your entitlements, which have somewhere where they came from, and your lack of imagination, have never actually realized your identity on the level that you really need to. Okay? So that's first. And that is a very, very, very important point. When we are dealing with this, one of the biggest things that I want to get across is an understanding that if you are expected to change according to Scripture, that means that there is no predetermined identity with you per se. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you are of the more conservative side of Christianity and not as charismatic, we can talk about charismatic in a minute, but if you have a Baptist background, Presbyterian background, even a Lutheran or Episcopalian background, there is a relative amount of predetermination concepts being presented. Predetermination that one man's sin caused everyone to be born in sin. Even though that there's scripture after scripture after scripture that say that each person is accountable for their own lives. Now, having said that, I recently discussed that there is an instruction on our hearts at this time. I should say in our DNA at this time that potentially contains limiting beliefs that aren't from your generation. Your DNA can potentially contain a limitation based upon something that happened to an ancestor generations ago. The reason this is important is because each father's DNA contributed yet more information as it went along. And so there's a necessity that we may need to address that inside of you that is believing something that predates your birth. Okay? All right. So before we get into all that, let's start with some general and simple concepts. The first one that I would like you to get your mind wrapped around is, who told you you were naked? So you say, number one, dot, who told me I was naked? Okay. Number two, where are your accusers? Okay. That's important. Where are your accusers? And number three, you are not what you do, but what you believe about yourself, you will do. Okay. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Let's talk about number 1. When we're dealing with a need for the change of a mind, I will tell you that there are 3 areas that prevent you from this. The first one is what you believe about yourself. Okay? The second one is what people have told you about yourself that you believe. And sometimes that can go hand in hand. I'll explain. Really, technically, unless you have done a lot of inner work, you most likely are experiencing external validation. What I mean by that is that you need people to tell you that you are who you are. And you have not yet determined who you are. And as a result of that, if people tell you who you are, if that is influential enough, it will become information stored and used as a frame of reference for all the information that passes through your eyes and your ears and enters into your heart. And not only out of the abundance of the heart do words come, but once they're confessed and once they are processed, they become actions. So starting at the beginning, when we are working through this, one of the things that we need to determine and one of the things that we need to understand is that if we are told in the Bible to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, you have not arrived. And not only have you not arrived, but you also are probably pretty screwed up. Now, there are people, here's the funny thing. Right now, there are people who are potentially watching that are now offended because I said they're screwed up. I'm going to tell you something. That's because you're screwed up. That's why you're offended. During this series, we're going to talk about the anatomy of an offense. And not only that, but we are going to talk about what it really actually means to create drama. What's the purpose behind it? Why does it happen? Why do we thrive on it? Because listen, I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you. Every single last one of us, and therefore one of you, since I'm in the position of making these statements, every single last one of you is a drama queen. Every single last one of you thrives off of making things worse than they are and thrives off of making sure there's an element of stress and chaos in your life. You say, Rabbi Q, that's not me. I don't do that. I will promise you by the end of this thing, you will be confessing it. You will be confessing it. You will be going, I need to repent. So here is the simplicity of the model. The model is simple. It goes something like this. We have built into us identities based upon information, period. It doesn't really matter where that information comes from. And I can tell you that there's all kinds of things we're going to have to work through to understand why identities end up being what they are. But what I am going to tell you is who you think you are not, and who you actually are is who you need to be. I can tell you that no matter what, information is why you have an identity. Somebody told you you're naked. Question is, what does that mean? Well, in general terms, I'm just going to go with this, okay? Going into the Garden of Eden. Now, Adam and Eve have already eaten the fruit. They are hiding from God. They hear him in the garden, right? They are hiding from God. God says, where are you? Adam says, I hid myself because I was naked. Right? And what does he say? Who told you you were naked? Oh, the ramifications of this run deep. We could get into Adam's self-consciousness. We could get into that the knowledge of good and evil has to do with sex. We could get into all kinds of things. But in the end, the intensification of all power in the universe, the creator of all things, who, however much he had to dial back that power to be in the garden with them, still knew everything, still was everywhere, and still was all powerful. In that thought process, it is imperative that we understand that when he asked, who told you you were naked, what he was trying to say was, why are you buying into that? What did I tell you you are? I am given the thought process of the school kid, right, who has an amazing set of parents. They lift his self-esteem. They tell him he's special. They tell him that he's strong, etc. He goes to school and a bully starts to pick on him. And a bully starts to tell him what his identity is. and he rejects it because his father told him what he was. And that kid has no precedence over that. That is the allegory of what needs to change in the function of this mess. You need to stop listening to the voices, because there is actually only one true identity. And I promise you, the Bible fails compared to your experiences with God at telling you who you are. The reason I say that is not to be disrespectful. I get that we could at least accept Tanakh as the inspired word of God, and that we could potentially accept the New Testament or the latter writings as the inspired word of God. But regardless, you need to understand that it's not communicated the way that you need it to be for this to work. How many times since you began your journey with God, whether you're brand new, maybe 3 days old in your walk, or you are 80 years old, there is an idea here that you have had experiences with God in your walk with God, whether you were raised with it and now you're well into your later years, or whether you just yesterday watched a YouTube video and decided to accept Christ. There have been incidents of a calamity and a deliverance, and that miraculously resulting in a person not being able to explain why. Why do we have a blessing, especially when we feel the way we feel about ourselves? But also, there's just that idea, it's unexplainable, right? Money in the bank account that wasn't there. Prevented from rolling the car or whatever. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details of what could possibly be the experience, but it's not in the Bible. It's not written down that a car won't roll. But if you have been in an accident and you were supposed to roll your car and nobody can explain how you didn't, and it saved your life, enter intensification of all power in the universe, enter credit where credit is due, but enter also your identity. You see, identity is the key here. There are many theories. There are more theories in psychology than there are in any other science. In fact, there are more theories in psychology than there is evolution. Okay? So the study of evolution has less theories than psychology. Why do I say that? Because one of the failures of psychology is a misidentification of a person. How many of you have been told you have a bipolar disorder? But what do you say? I'm bipolar. You go to a meeting and you say, I am an addict. You go to a place where people go to have their minds fixed and walk out of there saying, I am this or that, and have this medication or that medication. You see, the issue here is about the misidentification. There are many theories about why a person is the way they are. There are personality typologies. There are different pathologies, which is basically the study of abnormal psychology. There are different theories about substances and different theories about addictions and different theories about everything that pertains to family dysfunction, etc. But the truth is that part of that issue has to do with a misidentification of the human. Now, we're going to get into that. So who told you you were naked is going to be very, very important, okay? Next one, where are your accusers? I have talked to people who have been so afraid of what somebody might say if they did a certain thing. I hear it on a regular basis. I'm worried about what such and such will think. Or I'm worried they're going to think this about me. Or I am this thing because that's what they accuse me of. You know, there's actually a philosophy that I have experienced in my dealing with people, in counseling and mentoring, that has literally come in the form of this. Well, that's what people think I am, therefore that's what I'm going to be. Why call them a liar? May as well prove them right. Right? There is that principle. There is that function. And I'm like, okay, we need to fix your identity. Literally, people make accusations of us on a regular basis. You're too impatient. That's an accusation. We don't frown upon positive accusations. Oh, you're such an amazing person, right? That's an accusation. Oh, you know what? You're such a pain in my butt. That's usually a joke, but still an accusation. Where are your accusers is going to teach you how to react to people's statements like that with a clear conscience. You are not going to, they are not going to have a leg to stand on because your identity will be intact and your conscience will be clear. And so we need to identify that one of the things that needs to change is how your conscience is being treated. Our last one, and this is an important one. It is not what you do that makes you who you are. If you steal, you are not a thief. You are a thief if you think you're a thief. And that's coming from one of two pieces of information, an accusation or a false identification. One is external, one is internal. But the key is an understanding that you may have stolen and you may have gotten in trouble for that, but you are not a thief. But if you think you're a thief, you'll steal. It is not what you do that makes you who you are. It's what you believe about yourself, and that will dictate what you do. Guys, I cannot tell you how dangerous that information I just shared with you actually is. You grow up being told that you will never amount to anything or that you're a wimp. And because you have had maybe an experience where you did not stand up for yourself, you believe you're a wimp. And so you do wimpy things. We're going to try to tweak that understanding. It doesn't matter how many times you make a mistake, fail, or do the wrong thing, that does not tell you who you are. That tells you what you do, but that doesn't tell you who you are. Now, what you do is dictated by believing something about who you are, meaning that also needs to be understood. If you've done something wrong, go find out what your identity was at that time. I think you're seeing a theme here. Identity is everything. Okay? So I would like, if you want, those of you who are on Zoom, maybe to take a moment, unmute and either ask questions or maybe make a statement about some of the things I've been saying, and we'll go from there. Let me see what time it is. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody want to make any statements? Okay. So at the beginning of this thing, I did say, right, that you could walk away, you could leave right now with this one thing of understanding and you'd be fine. And that is that everything that's wrong with you, that's creating a problem in this world as a compounding of other people's problems, is about your identity. Somebody told you were naked, and somebody accused you, and you believe it, and therefore you continue to do it. Okay? That's key. That's the simplicity of this. You believe it, and now you're doing it. And that goes into kind of a cyclic process where you believe it, you do it, you believe it, you do it, you believe it, you do it. But the disillusionment of your relationship with God, your relationship with your family and your people, and your relationship with yourself are all based upon those processes. Now, I told you earlier, your wounds, your limiting beliefs, and your entitlements are what is the damage, right? But also your lack of imagination. So here's another tidbit that you could log off of YouTube after you hear this. And that is that you have spent your life up until now only imagining the future in fear. Now, bear with me, because some of you are visionaries, and some of you probably have had some amazing intention of the future. But have you ever had a perfect, unadulterated, doubtless vision? What if I told you you could? What if I told you that it was possible to not doubt and to not fear? I think you'd probably think I was crazy. But the truth is that your fears are not coming from the future. Even though fear itself is an anticipation of potential harm to your body, your mental health, or your property, or others, and it's an imagination about the future that has not come to pass and may or may not happen the way you expect it to, regardless of all that, those fears come from the past. And so this tidbit where you could log off YouTube and then you don't have to listen to me anymore is this. You live your life in your past, not your future. To quote somebody else, you live life in your memories instead of your imagination. Your past eternally governs you. What if I told you that you can undo that? You see the mistake that people make here. The foolish concept that is present in humanity is a belief that they can judge a person because that person's behavior is negative and contrary to not only their social expectations, but perhaps even maybe some violation of rights, right? That's key. But not once is it taken into consideration that that person who you consider to be the world, right, who's all screwed up and they don't have a clue and all of the other little pet statements you have to make about people who are not you and are supposedly lesser able to be good than you, that they also need a renewing of the mind. Now, here's where it gets heavy. Because of that fact, when Paul says, be not conformed to the ways of this world, we start coming up with all of the things that the world is first. Instead of listening to the part where we need to renew our mind, because this is what will happen. This is exactly how it works. Let me figure out what the world is. Well, let's see. The world is the people who are communicating a less than conservative ideal. The world are the people who have embraced a different lifestyle than what you approve of. The world are people who don't have self-control. The world are people who are consumed by materialism. And do you know what we do? We look at that scripture, we say, be not conformed to the ways of this world. We come up with that list in our head, decide that we are not that way, and that's it. We move on. We literally read that one part of that chapter and verse of Paul's letter, Romans chapter 12, verse 2, that part A, be not conformed to the ways of this world. Oh, I'm not. I don't conform to the ways of this world. So that's transformed, becoming transformed by the renewing of our mind, that doesn't exist. Because we literally explain away what we think the world is. But here's the interesting thing. I'll go back to my original statement. Do you feel like you have arrived at some place where you can say that you have actually changed? That you are no longer the person that you were, and that there has been a change occurred so drastically that nobody recognizes you. And in addition to that, there is no possibility that it's ever going to happen again. I am not saying that there are 100% failures in this world, because I know. Look, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. Somebody has sat in front of a camera or in front of an audience in an amphitheater, or sat in front of everybody in front of a cave and said the same words I'm saying right now. When I talk about you needing to be, or when I talk about being the change that this world needs, I talk about that you're screwed up, you're going to overcome it, you're going to become a practitioner of overcoming it, and therefore you're going to become a master of it. And when you master it, then you're going to start to teach people how to overcome it, and they won't have to go through what you went through to learn that. That's being the change that this world needs, but you need to understand it's because you're the world. When it said, don't be conformed to the ways of this world, it was not talking about your political view. It was not talking about your social mores. And it was not talking about your way of thinking, because I'm going to tell you right now, Paul was a Jew. Paul was a rabbi. Paul was a Pharisee. His understanding and his paradigm concerning the world is not your paradigm. It is not your understanding. And so don't think because you see a commercial that supposedly takes Jesus out of the season that you somehow have arrived at some sort of righteousness by which you don't have to have a transformed mind. I'm going to tell you right now, you're the problem. If your focus is on a political party, or your focus is on a person in the news, a criminal, say maybe there's a high profile trial, right? Or say your focus is on a coworker or a sibling or a child. Maybe you're the parent. And it comes to a point in your brain where you don't have to be transformed because that person is the problem. Maybe it's a different religion. But either way, if you don't have to change because that person or that thing or that political view or that lifestyle is the problem, oh, mama, you're the problem. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that from this point forward, going through this series, you need to start to think about what it is you really want. And the reason I bring that up is not because I think that you have your priorities messed up. You do. I promise you do. You would not need this teaching. You would not need this series if you weren't. Present company included. But I want you to understand what you put into this is what you'll get out of it. What you put into this is what you will get out of it. You could really change here. But the problem is that our brains are lazy. And I want to finish up tonight. You see, 8:14. I want to finish up tonight with an understanding about that. Okay? I want to basically give you an understanding of how our brains work. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and we're going to jump over to the whiteboard for this part. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. Let's say that we talk about this in terms of, I guess this would be neuroplasticity. It's the idea. Let me see if I can illustrate this for you. Okay, so let's do this. So we have these different steps, and then we have these different steps. Now, when you start to learn, so this is learning, okay? Learning. When we first start to learn, we will learn specific steps. So we're starting at point A. We need to get to point B. We have specific steps. And those specific steps that we have are basically kind of like little tiny thoughts that we need to think through, or little actions that we need to do to get to point B. So let's take a simple one. Let's talk about, like, for example, shifting the car, okay? Okay, so when we first start out, so what's the thing? Okay, so we're just going to write gas here, right? And I'm just going to say minus gas. And then we're going to say push in clutch, right? And then we're going to say brake. And then we're going to shift into neutral. And then we're going to shift. And let's say this is shifting car stopping. Okay. Oh, wait. That's a good idea. Let's use that color. Stopping. Okay. So we've stopped, right? And we can just say we're stopped here. Okay. And then we are going to shift back into drive. Okay. And then as we shift back into drive, we're going to release the clutch, release the brake, right? And then we're going to release the clutch. And we're going to apply gas. Okay, so this is clutch. Oops. Clutch. And this is brake. This is shift into drive, stop. This is apply brake, push clutch, clutch. Okay. So as you can see, as we're learning, somebody's telling us. Now, this is the key. Information is now creating a learning. Information coming in is creating a learning. What do you need to know about information? Information is not an action. Let me just sit down for a moment and say that to you so that you can hear it again. Information is not an action. Information is just that. So if a person says, okay, in order to properly be a good steward of your money, you can't enter into debt. Okay? That's information. It's not true. It's not false. It's just information. Until we test it to be true or false, experience the information, we don't know whether it's true or false. That's important because one of the things we do to information is we tweak it according to our frames of reference. Okay, so let's get back to our board. One of the things that people do is they will hear from their instructor, okay, you're going to have to apply the gas, or you're going to have to let off the gas as you start to push in the clutch. Take your foot off the gas and put it on the brake. Now, before you experience that truth, it's not true. The moment that you actually take your foot off the gas, apply the clutch, and put your foot on the brake, and the car stops, of course, shift into neutral, the car stops, you did not know that that was true. It wasn't until you experienced this that you finally believed that the information that was coming to you was true. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. What Christianity at large, psychologists at large, therapists at large, pastors at large do to you is they tell you, take your foot off the gas, push in the clutch, push in the brake, shift into neutral. That's true. But they never, ever want you to try to do it. They never want you to try to do it. Why? Because they just want you to believe that it's true. Now, it is not their fault. They've been taught this by their teachers and their teachers and their teachers until we get back to the original person who came up with it. What do I mean by that? I mean that this right here, these red points are experiences that have now occurred that you've recorded as memories. Okay? As they have become memories, they are now experiences that are context sensitive. Meaning what? When you get in the car and you push in and you start the vehicle and you're driving down the road and you let off the gas and you push in the clutch and you put your foot on the brake and you shift, you're doing that from memory. But here's the amazing thing about it. Once you had that enter into your memory, now remember, learning requires practice. Okay? But what you don't know is that the moment that you had this experience, it was recorded into your subconscious. It has contextual attachment to it. In other words, there's sound, sight, feeling, perhaps even smells. If you were in a car with a smoker when you learned how to do this, if you get in a new car that doesn't have the smell of smoke, you might have a hard time shifting. It's very possible. In fact, an experiment was done. Let me sit down for a minute. An experiment was done where they actually had a certain amount of college students go to their mathematics course sober. Okay. And then they had another group of college students go to their course with a dopamine intensifier of some sort. It was probably some legal version of cocaine or whatever. I don't know. Anyways, point being is that it was designed to have one group be high and the other group not be, or the other group be stimulated by substances. Okay. Then what they did is they had everybody go and take their final, or their midterm, actually is midterm, sober, both groups. The people who were high during their math course failed their tests. Then they did another study where they had the group go in high and take their tests, and they passed. After doing a bunch of other types of experiments, we found out that memory is context sensitive. The principle is that if you go into a situation in a certain manner, every single time you encounter something similar to that situation, memories activate and you start shifting the car. Meaning there's an autopilot programmed into you that has all the information about your wounds, about your limiting beliefs, your entitlements. A lack of imagination is the result of the fact that up until now, you have been running on autopilot, or you have been running on your wounds or thriving in your drama enough that you don't realize that imagination is necessary. So I will put out there that your imagination at this point in time is governed by your memories. Okay. Now you'll notice on the board, and I'll switch back there in a minute. You'll notice on the board that at the bottom I have 3 steps. Okay. I'm going to show you that right now. So once you've experienced it, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to introduce the blue as context. The context is recorded here. Context stops here. This is the sound of the car, the RPMs. This is the traffic in front of you, et cetera, et cetera. Now the context now what? Activates an automatic movement as long as the context is present. What does that mean? That means if you want to stop the car, you don't need to think about the gas. You don't need to think about the clutch, the brake, and shifting. You actually do it automatically because the experience is recorded now and replayed. That's right. Your experience is replayed. Now you understand why I say your experience overrides scripture. See, you think I was being sacrilegious, but I'm proving to you that your brain doesn't work the way the pulpit tells you your brain works. Your brain itself trusts your experiences subconsciously more than what you are told and have no way of verifying that truth. So when we are here, we can just call this stop bar. And when we are here, we can call this drive car. But this is what I want you to see. All of these steps are programmed into stop the car. Why is that so important? Because now those memories are buried in that one thing. You can no longer retrieve just gas. You can no longer retrieve push, clutch. You can't. And the reason you can't is because of neuroplasticity. What your brain did is it took all these and made them one step. So what would happen if you then had a negative emotion? Okay. So let's recreate this for a moment. Okay. In fact, you know what? This is not actually, you know what? I'm not going to go that direction with it. Let's go back to this. Okay. So I don't want to jump ahead on that yet because there's something else I need to address. So what I want you to understand is that if the brain figures out that something works, it's going to skip the steps. Okay. Stop car contains a whole bunch of steps. Sometimes those details are important, but your brain is lazy and it goes, I don't need those details anymore. I know how to shift a car. Right? It is not something you think about. You don't think about recording memories. That happens automatically. And you don't think about categorization. That happens automatically. So stop car contains all these details. Well, now watch this. You become wounded. Your brain is going to deal with trauma a certain way. When it finally finds something that works to alleviate the cognitive dissonance of that trauma, guess what gets erased? The details. Guess what gets ignored? The details. You don't drive your car and think about shifting. In fact, if you're driving an automatic, that's lost from your life, right? Until you get back behind a stick and grind them for a little while, that's lost from your life. Now, if you have an everyday driver and you have a weekend driver, that's different, right? Like, let's say you have a sports car that's a manual and you jump in it on the weekends, you're probably still going to remember. What I'm talking about is like when you've gone like years without a manual vehicle driving an automatic, it takes a minute when you sit back behind an automatic, a manual. Details become important again. They weren't for a long time. Same with wounds. Your brain has figured out a way to cope with that. And context triggers stop car, not let off gas. Meaning if you just need to let off the gas and that's all, your brain takes over the entire trip and says, nope, this works. Let me tell you what that creates. That unfortunately creates a bias that you really don't want to have. And that's that what? That the way that you have dealt with your wounds in the past is effective. And so why change? And so your body, your brain, everything is resistant to that fact. And so what do? Somebody actually offers to completely cure your brain of your trauma and you want to hold on to it. I want you to picture in your mind for just a moment a world where your negative emotions from the past do not play a role in your decision making. That is renewing your mind. That is the change that occurred in Peter. Listen, there's a point in time where he realized he was the change that this world needs, and he got over it. He got over the wounds. He got over the attitude. He got over it. When we're looking at this, you need to realize that your brain thinks without your permission that it's fine. It is time to realize that what you put into this is what you will get out of it. I want to open up the opportunity one more time for people to ask questions and make comments. And if you're on YouTube and people have questions or comments, please go ahead and answer them. When I finally can get to where I can get in the chat, I will do it. And I have no idea how many viewers we got right now or any of that stuff. I have none of my stats pulled up either. I can't get it to open. So any questions? Let me make sure that you guys can unmute. Any questions? Any comments? Any thoughts? Okay, so what about limiting beliefs? I told you that you might want to hold on to your wounds, but what if you actually wanted to hold on to your limiting beliefs as well? This is a crazy one because a lot of people don't realize that they want to be limited. Okay. Now, here's the irony. This most likely will be accompanied by entitlement. The reason for that is because the people who want to be limited probably did not necessarily have a structure in place of realistic limitations when they were younger. They either probably had a hypocritical realistic limitation. In other words, they were told to do something and then nobody else had to follow that. They may have had somebody as a parent who was afraid to limit them. There's plenty of reasons why you would want to hold on to your limiting beliefs. But the biggest reason why you want to hold on to your limiting beliefs is actually because of the fear of what you might become. Now, this is going to sound crazy, but this actually will go into fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of success, etc., those kind of things. But the principle is that we will hold on to our limiting beliefs for a reason that people don't realize, and that is that it works. The brain is lazy, but the brain is also very, very good at being careful. The brain is always looking out for your best interests without your permission. What I mean by that is that if you have ancestral information saying you cannot be successful at business, you never will be until you get rid of that limiting belief. If you have life experience information telling you you will never be successful at a relationship, then you will stay in that limiting belief. But here's the part that's crazy. You stay there because it works. Listen, we do not do what we don't want to do. I know that Paul said, what I don't want to do, I do. But this is a very different situation than what I'm talking about. Please don't get them twisted. What I'm saying is if I tell you right now to send me $1,000, if you don't want to do it, but you have the capability of doing it, you won't do it. But if you want to do it, you'll do it. My point being is that if you're able and you don't want to do something, you won't do it. The same is true of when we want something. If we want something, we will go to great pains to get it accomplished. I want that cheesecake that's in the back of the fridge that nobody has eaten. I want it right now. I'm going to go to the fridge. I'm going to get it, and I'm going to make sure that I eat it in private so that nobody knows that the cheesecake got eaten by me. I want that cheesecake. The point that I'm trying to make is literally your mind needs to, or your thinking needs to turn in the direction of understanding that if you want to do something, you will do it. But what if your desire was governed by a belief that you could only go so far? No matter how much you'd want it, you wouldn't do it because you would believe that that's as far as you could go. And that way, we want to live in our limiting beliefs. We literally want to stay where we're at because it's comfortable. I'm reminded of information I received during some of my psychology learning, where there's kind of a development in the brain that occurs in an abusive relationship, where the person will become attached to the abuse because of its repetition, and because of its emotional intensity. It will almost become a dopamine addiction. So technically, it would be like doing a drug. And so the person will get into this trap where they are attracted to abusers because it's actually like an addiction. The principle is it's not as much about self-care or self-esteem or any of that stuff. It's that the abusive relationship had such an intense adrenaline rush attached to it that the person will seek after that again. So please understand, we are not only dealing with, we're not just dealing with fears. Fear is an imagination about the future that may or may not occur that we are emotionally reactant to now. So it's interesting because that means that fear is actually a small part of the role of limiting beliefs. There is an element where this is going to have to do with who told you were naked, but the principle is that those limiting beliefs have basically become a pathology within us, either as a result of the fact of who said it, which is going to be one of two people, either somebody who we look up to or respect, or ourselves, because we actually do a whole lot of looking up and respecting ourselves. However much you think you don't respect yourself, I promise you, you respect yourself. In fact, I promise you that you are probably pretty narcissistic and don't even know it. That you are self-serving and don't even know it. And that if somebody told you that, you would get offended, which means your heart is not even open to change. You see, getting offended versus having a clear conscience and defending yourself are two different things. They are. So limiting beliefs are basically where you can't go any further because you believe you can't go any further. It could be as simple as believing that you just can't be successful in a relationship. And so you need to spend the rest of your life alone. I know people like that right now who believe that they cannot be successful in a relationship. I know people who believe that they will never get out of their 9 to 5. I know people who have retired who believe that they are done, that they're just trying to die now. In fact, one of the people who I counsel actually believes that he's going to die soon, and that he needs to kind of get his affairs in order. He doesn't know anything about death. He's not been diagnosed with anything. He just thinks because he's that old that's it. That's a limiting belief. I know a 72-year-old man who still jogs 5 miles a day. He was a distance runner in his 20s. He's ran his whole life, and he jogs. 72-year-old man. Actually, he's more than that now. I think he's probably 78. Still jogs every morning. And I know a 75-year-old man who can barely get out of bed in the morning. Now, I'm sure we could factor in all kinds of stuff. We could factor in illness, genetic stuff, injuries, etc. Okay. But some of that's in the minds of those two men. Some of that is in the mind of those two men. And so in that principle, I want you to understand that limiting beliefs have prevented you from so many opportunities. It's not even funny. And don't think for a second that it was God's will. Don't sit here and say, oh, it must not have been God's will when you're the one who decided you couldn't go any further. That's not fair to God or to you. Okay? Before we move on to entitlement and why we continue to stay entitled, I want to give an opportunity for somebody to make a comment or to ask a question about limiting beliefs. Okay. So moving on to entitlement. I have bad news for you. If you're American, you have an entitlement problem. If you are in the United Kingdom, you have an entitlement problem. In fact, I would say pretty much all the European countries, except for maybe more of the eastern side, you have an entitlement problem. Why do I say that? Because if you have come to expect that you should receive something as a result of good behavior, you have totally lost sight of why you're good. When it is possible for you to be good and not receive any extra stuff, but have just done it because of it being a duty, then you can probably say that you're not entitled. Now, if a person has gone down in healthy thinking, if they're lower in healthy thinking and their ego governs them, then their narcissism is more prevalent and probably more visible. And those people clearly look like they are entitled. when you start to get your mind wrapped around entitlement and have it correctly adjusted in your brain, then things change significantly in your life. Because you will not treat people the way you used to treat them. You will not treat property the way you used to treat it. You will not act the way you used to act. Now, anybody who actually wants to change is probably like, oh yeah, let's get rid of entitlement. That's easy, right? You just don't have an attachment to material items. You don't have expectations, blah, blah, blah. No. There is supposed to be entitlement, but not the entitlement that you are used to right now. But here's the crazy part. Because entitlement, narcissism, selfishness are taboo subjects, as it were. In other words, they're not really something comfortable in society. You don't have permission to be a narcissist. You don't have permission to have an ego. You don't have permission to be entitled to things. And so what we do is we hide the fact that we feel that way. And we will feign selflessness. We will feign philanthropy, charity. When the truth is that every single penny going out of your pocket, you're squeezing as it's coming out of your pocket, going into a charity. And that's something you don't actually want to do. But maybe it's a good plan for PR, etc. The reason why we don't want to let go of entitlement is because we don't believe that we're entitled. It's actually kind of a crazy catch-22. If you believe you're entitled, you probably aren't, because that means you have the humility to admit that you are. But if you don't believe you are, you most likely are, and are probably a narcissist. And I will propose to you that all narcissism really is a higher activation of ego as a result of fear. We have a false image. We try to maintain that. People figure out that it's a false image. We get anxiety about it. And so we try to create boundaries so that people can't dig. And as that starts to get assaulted, as we continue to have our true self exposed. Remember the True Colors song? Remember the idea that you have this honeymoon period with a person, honeymoon period with new experiences, jobs, whatever. How many people go apply for a job because they actually think it'll be a good job, and 6 months down the road are loathing the place? You need to understand that's because in your brain, you're saying, oh, well, the true colors came out. Well, the truth is that we will not be able to maintain those false identities for very long before we just expose them as a result of just not being able to control it. Some sort of impulsive action causes it to come out. So what's my point? My point is that the reason why we don't, like I said, these things are things we don't want to change. If we changed them, if we changed our wounds, if we changed our limitation or our limiting beliefs, if we changed our entitlement, we would be different. And if we're different, the world has changed. And therefore, we're the change that the world needs. The reason why we don't want to let go of entitlement is because we don't believe we have it. Remember what I said earlier about the whole idea of be not transformed by, or do not be conformed to the ways of this world? They're literally being conformed to the ways of this world. Once we figure out what the world is and we conclude that we're not that thing, we don't ever check the transforming the mind part. Same with entitlement. Because we don't believe we have it, we don't try to change it. What if I told you you actually don't have any rights? Half the room. If I had a room full of people and said, just so you guys know, you don't have any rights, half the room would get up and leave. More than that. They think I was out of my mind. And I'm sure that there's people right now going, oh yeah, he's crazy. You do not have any rights. What you have is an agreement socially that this thing causes discomfort or pain and should not be done to another person. And therefore, that now has become a rule or a law, right? A right to not have to experience it. But when has that ever played a role in the calamities in your life? Has life ever asked you permission because you have rights? No. And so the sooner you can get over the idea that it's fair or not fair of what you're going through, you will be better. That doesn't mean that we all of a sudden become aesthetics and move to a monastery and no longer have any material items and walk around in a crocheted toga playing some bell because we no longer need material items. Sorry, I like my technology. So I think the best way I could put it is, of the two, let me say, of the three things that you need to change, that are the wounds, the limiting beliefs, and the entitlements, the entitlement is the one that's the easiest to change because it's just accepting that you actually are. And the moment you do that, you will not like who you are or what you are. Because why? Because it's not okay to be a narcissist. It's not okay to have entitlement in this society. When the truth is, we probably all have it and all are it. It's just when somebody goes outside of the fringe of societal approval, or yet inflicts pain or abuse upon another and does that with an egotistical process, that's a narcissist. Now, me calling you a narcissist eats at your skin because you've experienced people who have been abusive or who have been entitled or who have acted very inappropriately. You go to a restaurant and you hear the person next to you demanding to speak to their manager because they don't like the way the sauce tastes. And in your mind, you're going, oh my God, I'm going to beat that person, right? You don't realize that the reason why it bothers you is because it's a fault in you. That saying of you don't know what you don't know can't hurt you kind of is true, in the sense that if you do not have an issue in that area, you will not be able to identify that issue in somebody else. It will be weird and foreign to you. You'd be like, I don't know what that person's doing. But if you can label it and identify it, I promise you it's in you. It's part of your makeup. So we've gone over wounds, we've gone over limiting beliefs, and we've gone over entitlement. But remember, I said lack of imagination is something you need to fix or something you need to add. So we need to get rid of the wounds, limiting beliefs, and entitlement. We need to add imagination or vision to our process. going to touch on that really quick. But before I do, does anybody want to say or ask anything about entitlement? And I'm going to wrap up on this really quick. Just want to give somebody a chance to speak up. Okay. So, last but not least, imagination. Real simple. If you can't picture it in your mind, it won't come to pass. Because you will actually cause the opposite to happen. The reason you can't picture it in your mind is because it's easier to stay with what you know. It's hard to come up with something new. Take, for example, a favorite color. Your favorite color is green, okay? Your whole life, you've loved green. Green, 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 green. And I tell you, change your favorite color. Let's say, change your favorite color to red. Or better yet, let's change your favorite color to black. Okay? That's your new favorite color. I said it, therefore that's what it is. That's your new favorite color. You no longer are allowed to have the favorite color green. What would your brain do? Well, first of all, the cognitive dissonance that would occur would immediately tell you to tell me to go somewhere with all that. But the second thing would happen is that there would be a personal bias towards black. You would be like, bleh, because I told you to like black. I can't make your brain like something that it doesn't want to like. And in the same way, you will have a hard time imagining the color black because in your mind it's green. So let's say that I want you to envision having a new car. Because what that is going to do is it's going to create intention, and it's going to create attitude, and it's going to also invite to you opportunity that's not going to be governed by limiting beliefs. And so I'm like, okay, what car do you want? Okay, I want a Lexus. All right, great. Lexus, got it. Okay, so I want you to imagine your brand new car. And they're like, okay, I got it. And I'll say, okay, I want you to imagine that brand new black car. All of a sudden, they can't imagine it. They could see the green one. My point is that our imagination is governed by those same issues. So you have to learn how to force yourself to visualize things that are uncomfortable, things that are outside of your wheelhouse of ability. So let's say that you have had a dream in the past of becoming a ballet dancer. If you can't imagine that, it will play a limitation upon your process. We need to add visualization to our renewing of our mind. And the reason we do is because if you can see it, then you can experience the emotion of having it now. And that is very important and key. I'm not going to open up for questions and comments concerning imagination, and we just barely touched upon it. But what I would like to do is say that I would like you to definitely potentially post in comments. For those of you who are on Zoom, obviously you can post it in Slack. But on YouTube, you can post your comments about your experiences, about questions, about things that I've talked about tonight. You can You can even pretty much flat out tell me I'm out of my mind. But I can tell you right now that I have personal experiences, just like the car shifting. I have personal experiences that are now pre-programmed subconscious metadata and models of change because of experience. What I'm teaching you is actually how God brought change about in my life. Now, I want you to notice we haven't done a whole lot of preaching here. You've been learning about what you are right now. We need to talk about what you're going to become and why that is important. And so that's probably what we're going to cover next week. We'll see. We'll go ahead and say that we're probably going to do this every Wednesday night at around 7 p.m. It kind of depends on if the technology is being compatible or not. And of course, what time I've ended up eating dinner or whatever. But I'm thinking 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time is going to be our time for this series. For those of you on YouTube, I will say shalom and tell you to have a peaceful rest. And I hope that this has been eye-opening, and I hope that it is in the long run going to be something extremely effective. Because I really would like to affect a bigger audience with this concept of being the change that this world needs. So, without anything further, have a peaceful rest. Shalom.